The slap cracked through the topmost floor of the corporation like a gunshot. Abini froze for half a heartbeat, her cheeks stinging, her eyes narrowing as the office spun back into focus. The glass walls reflected the scene in cold fragments, Jae-min behind his desk, his hand still raised, and the woman pressed against him with a look that was equal parts smug and frightened. Abini slowly lifted her head. "How dare you do this to me?" Her voice came out low and steady, and that calm made the room feel colder than the slap had. He took her work. He took her dignity. Now watch her take everything else. Like and subscribe if stories like this interests you, because a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous person in the room. Jae-min leaned back in his chair, as though he had already grown tired of her presence. "Nah, mind your manners, Abini. I am still the head of this family." Abini gave a short, humorless laugh. "Really?" The woman beside him tightened her grip around his arm as if she wanted to make sure Abini noticed exactly where she stood now. Her silk dress shimmered beneath the office lights. Her lips were freshly painted. Her face carried the confidence of someone who had never had to build anything with her own hands. Abini looked at her, then at Jae-min, then back again. "Listen carefully," she said. "You can play husband to a fool, but I am not the woman you throw away and still expect to obey you." The other woman let out a small, practiced gasp and buried herself against Jae-min's shoulder. "Honey," she whined, "she is threatening us again." Abini's eyes sharpened. There it was, the performance, the soft voice, the fake fear. No poison wrapped in perfume. Jaemin's jaw flexed. "You heard me. Leave this office." Abini did not move. He rose. The air changed with him. For a second, she saw the man she had married years ago, the one whose voice had once been gentler, whose hands had once seemed capable of care. Then that version of him was gone, replaced by the man who had swallowed her work whole, spat out her name, and now looked at her like he owned the air she breathed. Abini's lips parted. Before she could speak, his palms struck again. Harder this time. Her head snapped to the side. A metallic taste touched her tongue. The woman beside him smiled. Abini touched the corner of her mouth with her thumb. When she looked down and saw the blood there, something in her face changed. Not fear, not shame. Decision. "Not you hit me because of your mistress?" she asked. The woman's eyes widened. Jae-min's expression darkened. "Watch your mouth." Abini stepped forward before he could stop her. The room went still. Then she raised her hand and slapped the other woman across the face so hard the woman stumbled into the desk with a sharp cry. The sound that followed was not rage. It was silence. Long, dangerous, heavy. The woman clutched her cheek and stared at Abini in disbelief. "She slapped me, honey." Abini did not blink. "Good. Consider it a lesson." The woman's face twisted, but Abini did not give her room to perform again. "You shameless duo make me sick," she said, her voice quiet enough to cut. "You can take my marriage if you want. You can try to humiliate me if it makes you feel taller. Yeah, but hear this clearly. What belongs to me does not become yours just because you are greedy enough to touch it." Jae-min's eyes turned sharp. "Guards." The word dropped like a command he expected the whole building to obey. 5 guards entered at once. Abini did not flinch. Jae-min pointed at her as though she were a stain. "Escort Madam home. Make sure she does not leave the house until I give the order." The guards approached. Abini stood still, jaw tight, breath controlled, the heat of rage building under her skin like fire under glass. They surrounded her, careful not to touch her too roughly, as if she might bite. "Touch me if you dare," she said quietly. None of them answered. That was answer enough. As they guided her toward the door, Abini turned once more to look at Jae-min and the woman clinging to him. This is not over," she said. The woman gave a small, satisfied smile. Jae-min looked away. Abini was marched out of the office, through the executive corridor, and past every staff member who had once greeted her with bowed heads and careful respect. No one spoke. No one moved to stop it. Faces appeared behind glass doors. Some looked ashamed. Some looked frightened. Some looked relieved, as though a storm had passed and they had survived it by pretending not to see. Abini's heels struck the polished floor with measured precision. She refused to hurry, refused to bend. The elevator doors closed in front of her like a coffin lid. She did not cry. Not there. Not even when she stepped into the lobby and felt the whole atmosphere of the building shift around her. Employees looked up, then quickly away. Some looked uneasy. Some looked curious. A few looked almost relieved. Abini kept walking. Then she saw him. He stood near the reception desk, half turned away from the crowd, a man in a dark coat with a quiet, unreadable face. Tall, composed, entirely out of place in the noise and greed of the building. His features were sharp without being harsh, his expression cool without being empty. He was not one of Jae-min's men. He was not staff. He was simply there, watching. His gaze met hers for the briefest second. Abini felt it like a touch. Not pity. Interest. Real interest. She did not know his name, but something in the way he looked at her made her straighten her spine instead of bowing it. One of the guards urged her onward. Abini ignored him and held the stranger's gaze a moment longer before she was pushed toward the doors. No, he did not look away. Outside, the air was cold and thick with the promise of rain. Abini stepped onto the front walkway, and the doors shut behind her with a heavy final sound. The first drop touched her cheek. She lifted her face toward the darkening sky and let out a small laugh under her breath. They had thrown her out. Fine. Then they would learn what happened when a woman who had built something with her own hands was left with nothing to lose. By the time night came, the rain had not stopped. It came down in sheets, silver and relentless, drumming against the roof and washing the city in blurred light. Abini stood inside the house she had once called home and stared at the children's school bags lined neatly beside the door. Too neat, too silent, too wrong. She had already changed out of her office clothes. Now her cheeks still burned. Her mouth still carried the faint metallic trace of blood. But she had not gone upstairs to rest. Instead, she had waited in the hall for Jae-min to return, because he always needed an audience when he wanted to wound her properly. The front door opened. He stepped inside as if the storm outside had nothing to do with him. He removed his jacket, handed it to a maid, and looked at Abini as though she were an irritation still lingering where it did not belong. Abini's gaze locked on his. I won't let you treat my children anyhow because of a whore. His eyes moved to her slowly. She went on before he could interrupt. Why would you change their school from a proper school to a substandard one? Why do they have to trek home? What happened to the car? Well, what happened to the driver? Jae-min's expression hardened with each word. I am disciplining them, he said. Abini stared at him. He did not even pretend shame. If you do not behave, he added, voice lower now, you and the children can all end up on the street tonight. The room seemed to shrink. Abini's breath caught, then steadied. You dare not. He stepped closer. Because of that woman, you think you can talk to me like this? Abini's eyes flashed. Because of that woman, you want to throw your own children and me out? His hand moved before she could brace herself. The slap threw her sideways. Her shoulder struck the edge of the table. Her head followed. Pain burst behind her temple, white and sudden and blinding. The room tilted. For one sharp moment, all she heard was the ringing in her ears. And then Jae-min turned away as though she no longer mattered and walked out of the hall. Abini tried to straighten. Her knees gave out. She hit the floor. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the curtain shifting slightly in the draft from the open door, then nothing. Mom! The voice came through the fog first. Small, frantic, terrified. Mom, wake up! Abini's lashes fluttered. The ceiling above her came into focus in slow pieces. Her head throbbed with every heartbeat. Something warm and sticky slid near her hairline. The children. Her children. Abini tried to move and hissed at the pain. Careful, one of them cried. Her little son was on one side of her, her daughter on the other. Their faces were wet with tears, their small hands trembling as they held onto her body. Abini's chest tightened. Now she reached for them weakly. I'm here, she whispered. Both of them broke into sobs. Then the front door opened again. Jae-min returned. The children turned in horror and clung tighter to her. Dad, her son cried, Mom is not responding to us. Abini looked up at him slowly. His face was cold enough to freeze the room. The children did not move away from her. They only pressed closer, as though their small bodies could shield her from him. The younger one was still crying. The older one stared at him with an expression too old for her age. Jae-min looked at them with open disgust. "Take them to their rooms," he told a maid. "No!" the children shouted at once. Abini tried to push herself up. The room spun. Jaemin's eyes narrowed, annoyed rather than concerned. "Take them away." The maid hesitated, and the butler appeared at the edge of the hall, pale and uneasy. "Master," he said softly, "it is raining outside." Jaemin's gaze snapped to him. "Are you the one deciding how this household runs now?" The butler lowered his head. Jaemin pointed at the children. "Throw all three of them out." The words landed with brutal finality. The maid gasped. The children froze. Abini stared at him. For a moment, even the rain seemed to stop. "Jae-min," she said, her voice shaking now with pain and fury. "You cannot possibly mean that." He looked at her the way someone might look at an insect still moving after being stepped on. "I mean exactly what I said." The butler opened his mouth, then closed it again. No one moved. "Now," Jae-min said. The butler hesitated only a second longer. Then, with visible reluctance, he turned toward Abini and the children. It was not him she hated in that moment. It was the house, the silence, the obedience, the kind of cruelty that could dress itself up as order and still demand respect. The children began to cry harder. Abini dragged herself upright with visible effort, one hand braced against the floor, the other around her daughter's shoulder. "Don't you dare touch them," she said. Jae-min said nothing. The butler looked miserable, but he still stepped forward. The children clung to Abini as the maid tried to pull them away. "Mum, please," her son sobbed. "Don't let them take us." Abini's chest ached so sharply it felt like it might split. She gathered both of them against her, ignoring the pain in her head, ignoring the blood on her face, ignoring the humiliation burning hotter than everything else. And then the butler, with shaking hands and a lowered gaze, did the unthinkable. He opened the door. Rain and wind rushed in. The three of them were pushed out into the night. The door slammed shut behind them. Abini stood on the wet steps with her children pressed to either side of her, her clothes sticking to her skin, rain running down her face in cold lines that could almost be mistaken for tears. The younger child started shivering immediately. Abini pulled them both close, her jaw tight, her whole body trembling not from weakness alone, but from the force of what she was holding back. Her husband had thrown them out, like garbage, like strangers, like they had never mattered. She lifted her face toward the dark windows of the house. Every room was lit, every curtain drawn, every person inside had chosen silence. No, Abini looked down at her children. Something fierce settled in her expression. "We are not begging to stay," she said. Then she turned toward the gate. One step, then another. Rain soaked her to the bone. The children stumbled after her, and she guided them with one arm while forcing herself to stay upright with the other. They had barely reached the driveway when a black car slowed to a stop near the curb. Abini looked up sharply. The rear window lowered. The man from the corporation sat inside, still calm, still unreadable, still watching her as though he had been waiting for this exact moment. The stranger from the lobby. His eyes fell first to the children, then to the blood at the edge of her temple, then back to her face. His gaze sharpened, and for the first time since she had been thrown out, Nasabini felt something that was not rage. He spoke, his voice low and controlled. "Get in." Abini did not move. Neither did he. Rain hit the roof of the car in a steady hush. The children tightened their hold on her. The man's eyes remained on hers, not asking, not pleading, just waiting with the kind of patience that suggested he already knew she would not stay stranded forever. Abini looked at him, then at the dark road, then back at the house behind her. Inside that house were her clients, her work, her records, her name, her life. And now there was this stranger, quiet, steady, dangerous, standing at the edge of her ruin like he had stepped out of it on purpose. Abini's hand curled slowly into a fist. She had been thrown out. Fine. But this was not the end. It was the first move. Just before she decided, the car door unlocked with a soft click. She looked at it, then at him, and for the first time that night, she smiled. Not because she was safe, because she was not broken. Rain struck the car in hard, restless sheets as it pulled away from the gate. Abini sat rigid in the back seat, her children pressed tight against both sides of her, their small bodies still shaking from the cold and the shock. One of her arms stayed wrapped around them. The other rested over the younger child's shoulder, firm and protective, as though she could hold the night back by force alone. No one spoke. The silence inside the car was not empty. It watched. Abini could feel the man in the front seat without looking at him. His presence reached the back of the vehicle in quiet, deliberate waves. He had not hurried her, had not coaxed her. He had simply opened the door and waited, as though he already knew she would choose movement over humiliation. The children began to settle only after the heater warmed the air. Even then, they stayed close, their faces half buried against her coat, as if they were not yet convinced safety could survive the night. Abini turned her gaze to the window. The house behind them grew smaller, its windows glowing through the rain like something alive and pretending to be kind. She looked away before the sight could settle into her bones. At last, the man in front spoke. "You are injured." His voice was low, calm, and even. Not soft, not sharp. Controlled. Abini turned her head slightly. "I am still standing." "That was not my question." She pressed her lips together. The edge of her temple throbbed with every beat of her pulse. A steady reminder that her body had not escaped the night the way her pride had. "Does that line usually work on people?" she asked. The faintest pause followed. "Only when they are pretending not to hurt." Abini said nothing. The driver glanced at the rearview mirror once. Nervous. Not because of her. Because of the man seated beside him. Abini noticed. She noticed everything now. "What is your name?" she asked. The man in front did not turn immediately. Then, after a breath, he answered, "Na Yiseok." The name was unfamiliar enough to catch her attention. Rare. Clean. It sounded carved, not spoken. Abini repeated it silently. Yiseok. He did not ask hers in return. That should have offended her. Instead, it made her wary. The car left the main road and entered a quieter stretch lined with tall fences and dark trees. And the city noise faded, replaced by rain and the low hum of the engine. Abini leaned forward slightly. "Where are you taking us?" "Somewhere dry." That is not an answer. It is enough for tonight. She studied the back of his head. A dark coat, straight posture, no wasted movement, nothing careless. That made him harder to trust, and harder to ignore. The car slowed before a modern gate. It opened at once. Abini's eyes narrowed. She did not like how easily the place yielded to him. The vehicle rolled into a wide, quiet compound where the lights were low and warm. The house itself was elegant without being loud, expensive without begging to be noticed. A place built for privacy, not display. The car stopped beneath a covered entrance. The driver got out and opened the back door. Abini did not move at once. Then her children looked up at her, waiting, watching her for the signal. She gave them both a small squeeze, then stepped out with them, careful despite the pain pulling at her head. The rain still fell behind them, but the roof shielded them here. A woman approached quickly with towels. Another followed with a tray and a first aid kit. No questions. No surprise. Just efficiency. That unsettled Abini more than if they had stared. Yiseok stepped out last and shut the door behind him. He moved as though the space already belonged to him. "Sit," he said. Abini looked at him. "You give orders very quickly, and you resist them very naturally, because I do not know you. That is fair." He gestured toward the sofa near the fireplace. The children were already being led there by one of the women, now who knelt to wrap them in dry towels with quiet care. Abini watched every movement. Nothing looked threatening. That meant nothing. Trust was a luxury she no longer had the right to spend. Still, her body swayed when she tried to remain standing too long. Yiseok noticed. His gaze sharpened. "You are about to fall." "I am not." He did not argue. He simply stepped closer and took the first aid kit from the woman beside him. Abini's eyes narrowed. You do not have staff for this? I do. Then why are you doing it? Because they would be careful. Her mouth tightened. He looked at the wound near her temple. I will not be. That should have sounded cruel. Instead, it sounded honest. She hated that she respected it. He motioned toward the sofa again. This time she sat. The movement pulled a sharp pain through her head, and she held still until the dizziness passed. Her children watched her with wide, frightened eyes. Their silence hurt worse than their tears. Abini drew them both in at once. I am here, she murmured. The younger one buried their face against her side. The older one stared at the doorway, then at Yiseok, as if trying to decide whether this strange man was danger or rescue. Maybe both. Yiseok crouched in front of her. The distance between them shrank. He cleaned the cut near her temple with careful hands. Not gentle, not rough, exact. Abini hissed when the antiseptic touched the wound. You could have warned me. I did. You said nothing. I said I would not be gentle. She glared at him. Something moved across his face. Not amusement, something smaller, private, recognition perhaps. As if he respected the glare because it proved she was still whole enough to fight back. Abini did not like how clearly he saw her. She did not like that she straightened her shoulders anyway. When he finished, he kept the bandage in place a second longer than necessary. Their eyes met. His face held no smile, but there was something else. Interest, sharp and immediate, as though he had been waiting to see whether she would break or bare her teeth. Abini did neither. She asked the question that had been pressing at her throat since the car door opened. Why were you there? Yiseok stood slowly. At your company? Yes. Business. Whose business? His eyes rested on hers. Yours, apparently. Before your husband decided otherwise. Abini's gaze hardened. So he knew. Of course he knew. Or anyone who had entered that building with intent would know she had not fallen from nowhere. She had built that place, her hands, her time, her name. And now Jae-min had shoved her out and expected her to disappear with the rain. Abini's fingers curled against the sofa. What exactly are you to him? She asked. Yiseok did not answer at once. That pause answered enough. She narrowed her eyes. You are connected to him. Everyone is connected to someone. That is not what I asked. No, he said quietly. It is not. The room went still. The children had quieted enough to listen. One of the women in the house had left hot water on the table, but no one interrupted. Abeni studied him and realized, with a slow chill, that he was choosing every word carefully. Not because he was hiding something small, because he was hiding something useful. She knew men like Jae-min, loud, greedy, obvious. This man was different. He did not need to raise his voice to hold a room. He did not need to threaten to be dangerous. That made him worse. Abini should have rejected him on instinct. Instead, her attention stayed. Yiseok glanced toward the children, then back at her. Do they know? He asked. Abini's brow tightened. Know what? What your husband has done. Her jaw clenched. They know enough. Yiseok nodded once, as if that confirmed something. Abini caught it. What are you thinking? I am thinking, he said, that your husband made a mistake. The words were quiet. Too quiet. Abini stared at him. A mistake. Not because he had struck her, not because he had thrown her out, not because he had done it in a way that left her alive. Yiseok's gaze stayed steady on hers. Abini did not like the pressure rising in her chest. Do not speak in riddles, she said. I am not. Then say it plainly. A beat passed. Then he did. You still have leverage. The room seemed to sharpen around that sentence. Abini slowly leaned back. Leverage. Of course. She had been too busy enduring the insult, the pain, the humiliation, to see the shape of what was still left in her hands. But his words cut straight through the fog. Her clients, her records, the contacts she had built, the systems she knew better than anyone else in that company. Jae-min had stolen the title, but not the hands behind it. Not yet. Abini's eyes changed. Yusok saw it. Good. He seemed to expect it. "Who are you?" she asked again. He held her gaze. "Someone who noticed you before your husband remembered to fear you." The sentence stayed in the room. Abini did not move. Her children looked between them, confused by the tension, by the strange intensity in the man speaking to their mother as if he knew the shape of her anger. She should have rejected the answer. Instead, she heard the danger in it. He had noticed her. Before the fall, before the humiliation, before the rain, before tonight. For the first time since everything broke, something other than rage stirred in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but a warning. Yiseok stepped back and reached into his coat. He pulled out a slim phone and placed it on the table in front of her. Abini frowned. "What is that?" "Your future, if you choose to use it." She did not touch it. "Now explain." He looked at the phone. "It has one number saved. Mine." Abini's suspicion sharpened. "Why?" "Because tomorrow your husband will tell the world you walked out on your family." Her eyes flashed. "He will smear your name before dawn if he can." Abini's mouth tightened. That sounded exactly like him. Yisok continued, calm as ever. "He will say you became unstable, reckless, bitter. He will present himself as the patient man forced to endure you." The children had gone very still. Abini felt one of them reach for her hand. She closed her fingers around the small hand immediately. "You know him well," she said. "I know men who confuse ownership with power." The answer was smooth. Too smooth. Abini stared at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone. Yisok watched without reaction. She turned it once in her hand and looked up at him again. "And what do you want from this?" she asked. The room seemed to hold its breath. He did not answer at once. When he did, his voice was lower than before. "What I want," he said, "is to see what you do when they leave you with nothing." Abini's pulse steadied. Not because she relaxed, because she understood. He was not helping out of kindness. He was watching her because he expected something, and somehow that made his help feel more honest than the empty mercy of the people who had stood by while she was dragged out. Abini set the phone down. "I am not a helpless woman. I know. I do not need saving. I know that too." The certainty in his voice made her look up. He was already watching her. Too closely. Too deliberately. Abini lowered her voice. Then why are you here?" Yisuk's expression did not change, but something in the room tightened anyway. "Because," he said, "I think you are about to take back everything they stole." The silence that followed was deep and dangerous. Abini looked at him for a long moment, then lowered her gaze to the phone again. "Take back everything." The words struck something in her that had been buried under pain, humiliation, and rain. Something sharp, something awake. Her husband thought throwing her out had ended the matter. He had made the mistake of confusing silence for surrender. Abini lifted her head slowly. Her face was still bruised. Her body still hurt. Her children were still frightened. But her eyes had changed. Yiseok noticed. Of course he did. And just before she could speak, the phone on the table lit up. Unknown number. Now one incoming message. Abini picked it up without thinking. The words on the screen made her blood run cold. "If you want your files back, come alone." Her grip tightened around the phone. Yiseok saw the shift in her face at once. "What is it?" he asked. Abini looked up at him. For the first time that night, the calm in the room broke, not in sound, in feeling, because whatever had just begun had already started hunting her back. Abini stared at the message until the letters seemed to press through the screen and settle under her skin. "If you want your files back, come alone." The room had gone still around her. Not silent still. Even the children had felt it. The younger one shifted closer into her side, tiny fingers curling into the fabric of her coat. The older one looked up at her face and stopped breathing for a second. The way children sometimes did when they understood something bad had entered the room even before they could name it. Yiseok noticed the change at once. His gaze moved from her face to the phone in her hand. "What is it?" he asked. Abeni did not answer immediately. Her fingers tightened around the device, then loosened. Someone had been waiting for her. That was all it took for the cold to spread through her chest. "They have my files," she said at last. Yiseok did not ask which files. "Where?" "I do not know yet." His eyes narrowed. "Who sent it?" "Unknown number?" He held out his hand. Abeni looked at it for a beat too long. She did not fear him. Not exactly. She simply hated handing over anything tied to the moment her life began to split apart. Still, she passed him the phone. Yiseok checked the screen once, and then again, slower this time. His face remained unreadable, but something in his posture changed. Abeni caught it immediately. "What?" she asked. He looked up. This came too fast. Abeni's brow tightened. "Meaning?" "Meaning whoever sent it expected you to be somewhere else." The room sharpened around that. Abeni stared at him. "So it is a trap." "Yes." No softness, no drama, just the shape of it. The children went quiet. Abeni set the phone down and drew a slow breath through her nose. "Then I will not go." Yiseok handed the phone back. "You should still find out who wants you badly enough to risk this." She looked at him sharply. He continued, voice even. "If someone has your files and thinks they can pull you out alone, they already know where they are weakest." Abeni said nothing. Afraid. And that part struck her in a place she had not expected. Afraid of her. That was new and useful. She looked toward the children, then back at him. "Stay with them." One of the women in the house moved closer, clearly ready with more towels, tea, questions, concern. Abeni barely noticed. Her mind had already begun moving pieces into place. Yiseok watched her as if he knew it. "Where are you going?" he asked. Abeni lifted her chin. "To see who thinks I am desperate enough to obey." He didn't try to stop her. That, more than anything, unsettled her. He turned slightly and spoke to the woman by the doorway in a low voice. Within minutes, the children were being guided to a nearby room with warm milk and a blanket tucked around their shoulders. Abeni watched them go. The older one looked back once before the door closed. Now she wanted to call them back, wanted to keep them within reach where she could see every breath they took. But the war in her chest would not let her stop moving. Not now. Not when the message was still burning in her hand. When the children were gone, the room felt larger and emptier at once. Yiseok turned back to her. "You are not going alone." Abeni gave him a flat look. "I did not ask for company." "No," he said, and his voice remained maddeningly calm. "You rarely ask for what you need." The words landed harder than they should have. She held his gaze. There was something irritating about him in the most precise way. He spoke like a man who had already measured the room and decided where every crack led. It was hard to tell when he was observing and when he was stepping too close. Abeni hated that she noticed. "I can handle myself," she said. "I know." "Then stop talking like you doubt it." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I do not doubt you. I doubt your husband." That silence was enough to stop her. Yiseok stepped closer, just enough to lower his voice. "You were thrown out because he thought you had already been weakened. That means he believes pain makes you predictable." Abeni's face hardened. His gaze flicked to the phone in her hand. Let him keep thinking that. Something dangerous shifted in the air. Abeni felt it and tried not to name it. He was not trying to rescue her. He was sharpening her. That was different. That was useful. And maybe that was why she reached for his coat when he took it from the back of the chair and offered it without ceremony. She looked at it. "Why, I do not need that." "You are soaked." "I said I do not need it." His eyes held hers. "Then take it for the children later." Low blow. She took the coat. Not because he had won, because he had mentioned the children. She slipped it over her shoulders and buttoned it loosely. The warmth settled around her like an intrusion she had not invited, and the scent caught her unexpectedly cedar, clean fabric, something cool beneath it. She did not like that she noticed. Yiseok spoke to someone near the corridor. A car was brought around, not a showy one, nothing built to announce wealth, just dark glass and quiet authority. Abini followed him outside. The rain had eased, but the air still carried the smell of wet pavement and the promise of more. She stepped into the car after him and shut the door. And neither of them spoke until the driver pulled away. Only then did Abini ask, "Where are we going?" Yiseok looked out the window before answering. "Somewhere your husband will not expect." That could mean anything. It does. Abini stared at him in the dim light. You are comfortable with not giving direct answers. And you are uncomfortable with not controlling the room. She looked away first. The city slid past in streaks of light and shadow. The streets were thinner now, quieter. Too late for decent people, too early for the dishonest ones to be tired. Abini's fingers curled in her lap. "Do you know who sent the message?" she asked. "Yes." The answer came so quickly she turned to him. Yiseok did not look back at her. "At least, I know who likely had access to your files." "Who?" He paused. Abini felt her body tighten. Then he said, "Someone inside the company." Her eyes went cold. Not because it was surprising, because it was offensive. One of her own people. One of the people she had trained, corrected, protected, carried, and trusted. Abini looked straight ahead. "Name." "Not yet." She turned toward him, sharp. "Why not?" "Because I need proof before I hand you a betrayal and let your anger waste it." Abini's jaw tightened. That line would have sounded manipulative from her husband. From Yiseok, it sounded worse. It sounded like a man thinking 3 steps ahead while everyone else was still bleeding on the first. That was a dangerous man to stand beside. And somehow, she already was. The car turned into a district with fewer lights and heavier security. The building they stopped before was not a home. It was a tower smaller than Jae-min's, but sharper. No glitter, no overstatement. Only clean lines and the kind of calm that came from having too much control to need display. Abini looked at it with suspicion. "This is yours." "Yes?" "Of course it is." For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. Only a little. He got out and came around to her side. Abini stepped out with her shoulders squared and her chin lifted, as though she had not just been dragged out of her life and thrown into the rain with blood in her hair. Yiseok glanced at her face once. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "You should rest before you do anything reckless." Abini looked at him. "That is the first wise thing you have said tonight." His gaze stayed on hers. It was not a suggestion. Then it was wasted. He held her look for a beat, and then motioned her inside. The corridor beyond the lobby was quiet, dimly lit, guarded by people who moved with the calm precision of those who knew the doors mattered more than the walls. Abini took in the cameras, the locked access panels, the footsteps muted by thick carpet. This was not a place built to impress. It was built to contain. She understood that kind of place. That was why she recognized it immediately. Yiseok led her to a room on the upper floor. Not his office, she realized. Somewhere smaller. Less public. A room where people came to keep things out of sight. A table, 2 chairs, a screen, a stack of files. He shut the door behind them. Abini turned slowly. "You brought me here because I want you to see something." She folded her arms. I am not in the mood for tricks." "Then we are aligned." He set one folder on the table, then another, then a third. Abini did not move. Yiseok opened the first one and slid it toward her. Her eyes dropped. Her name, her work structure, her client pipeline, her account notes, her archived proposals. Her breath caught. Not copies, not rough summaries. These were the kind of internal records only someone with proper access could gather cleanly. The kind of material that made a company function. The kind that did not survive careless hands. She looked up. "Where did you get these?" "From a place your husband believes is secure." Abini looked down again. Margins marked, names underlined. One page tagged with a small note in sharp ink. Check Sabine. Her eyes narrowed. Sabine, her assistant. No, former assistant. And the woman she had trained for 2 years. The one who had never raised her voice, never tried to stand out, never seemed ambitious enough to be dangerous. Abini's throat tightened. Yiseok watched her carefully. You know her. She worked under me. The correction tasted bitter. Worked under me. As though the past tense could make betrayal cleaner. Abini flipped the page and found the access logs. Her stomach dropped. Repeated sign-ins, file transfers, secure folder access, all linked to a user account she recognized at once. Sabine's. Abini laughed once. There was no humor in it. So it was her. Yuseok did not answer. That made her look up. What? He held her gaze. Not only her. Abini went still. He tapped the next folder. Look again. She did. Then she saw it. Some requests came from the assistant account. Now others had been approved through an internal executive password. One traced to Jaemin's office. Another her breath caught. One tied to her own old clearance. Abini lifted her face slowly. Yuseok gave a single nod. Someone had used her credentials. Not stolen. Repurposed. Which meant someone had planned for her removal before she was ever removed. The room seemed to shift around that realization. Abeni's mouth went dry. This was not a sudden betrayal. It had been arranged. She looked at him, and the fury in her face had gone cold. Not hot, not loud. Cold enough to work with. He planned this, she said. Yes. With her. Likely. And he used my own access. Yes. Silence settled. Abini stood very still. The papers spread before her like evidence laid out for a trial she had not yet chosen to begin. And this was not just about a marriage. It was about extraction. They had not only stolen her job, they had mapped her work, taken her systems, and turned her own hands against her. Yuseok moved around the table and placed one more page in front of her. Abini looked down. A photograph. Sabine and Jaemin at a dinner event she remembered attending months ago. She had seen nothing then. She had been too busy to spare suspicion for what looked at the time like harmless proximity. Now it made her skin tighten. At the bottom of the image, a date. Below it, a note, started before the marriage announcement. Abini looked up at him. He was already watching her. You knew, she said. I suspected. And you did not tell me. I needed more. She stared at him. Anger rose fast, then got swallowed by the larger truth. He had not handed her guesses. He had handed her a path. Abini breathed out through her nose and steadied both hands on the table. My husband wanted me humiliated enough to run. Yuseok said nothing. Abini's voice stayed low, sharp. He wanted me gone quietly while he kept everything I built. That woman was decoration. Probably. Abini's eyes turned hard. Then he made a mistake. Yuseok's gaze moved to her face. She lifted the papers and began sorting them with quick, practiced movements, not because she had calmed down, but because she was focusing. The rage was still there. It had simply found a use. This was better. This was how she survived. Yuseok watched her work. Tell me something, he said. She did not look up. What? Did he ever understand what you were capable of? Abini's fingers paused. And then she gave a small, cold smile. No. She looked at him. He thought I was useful. That is not the same thing. Something unreadable moved through Yuseok's eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then his phone rang. He answered without shifting expression. Speak. Abini watched his face change just slightly, enough to tell her the call mattered. Then he said, Bring it up. He ended the call and looked at her. Abini's eyes sharpened. What now? Yuseok's voice lowered. Your husband just moved one of your client accounts. Her body went still. What? He is trying to transfer a major portfolio under his new wife's name. Abini's breath stopped. Not because it hurt, because it was insulting in the deepest way possible. That portfolio had been one of her hardest wins. The client had trusted her, not him. Had trusted her judgment, her persistence, the work she had put into every clause and every late-night call. She had built that account over years, and now he wanted to rename her labor. Abini's face changed. Yuseok saw it and held her gaze. Can he do that? She asked, though she already knew the answer. He can try. Abini straightened. No. One word. Quiet. Final. Yiseok's eyes hardened with approval. She was already reaching for the top folder again. Get me the transfer details. I will. And the client list. You will have it. And the contact trail. His expression did not shift. Already on the screen. That made her look up. He had not only been helping her, he had been preparing her. Abini stared at him for a moment longer than necessary, then looked back down at the papers. He stood beside her now, close enough that she could feel his presence without being touched by it. It should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like alignment, a strange, dangerous kind. Then the screen on the wall lit up. Abini looked first. A new message. Yiseok's eyes moved there too, and something changed in his face. Abini caught it at once. What is it? He did not answer immediately. Then he said, Your husband wants a meeting. Abini let out a soft laugh. It sounded ugly. Of course he does. Yiseok kept his eyes on the screen. He says if you return the files, he will be merciful. The word mercy almost made her laugh again, this time with real contempt. He is not merciful, she said. No. He is scared. Yiseok turned to look at her. Abini met his gaze. The room had gone very still now. Not awkward, charged. Now she had been thrown out, cornered, stripped of comfort, and still she stood there planning. He looked at her as though he had expected exactly this. Maybe he had. Abini gathered the papers one by one and slid them back into the folder with care. Then she said, Tell him I am coming. Yiseok's eyes narrowed slightly. Alone? Abini looked up. A faint curve touched her mouth. No. The room froze. Yiseok watched her carefully. Abini picked up the phone and tapped the screen once. Then she said, Tell him I am coming with proof. Yiseok's expression shifted. Only a little, but enough. Because he understood exactly what she meant. She was no longer reacting. She was moving. Outside, beneath the quiet of the building, the city kept going as if nothing had changed. Inside the room, Abini finally smiled. Well, not because she was safe, because she was awake, because she was done bleeding quietly. The message on the screen stayed there for 3 long seconds before the room seemed to remember how to breathe. Tell him I am coming with proof. Abini did not blink. Neither did Yiseok. Then he turned to her, slow and deliberate, as if the room itself had become something fragile. That was not a bluff. No, Abini said. Her voice came out even, but there was a blade under it now, sharpened by everything she had already lost. She pulled the folder tighter against her chest and looked down at the pages once more. Sabine's name, J. Mean's signature, the transfer trail, the dinner photograph, the access logs. All of it had gone from suspicion to fact so fast that disgust had not yet found its own proper shape. Now Yiseok watched her without speaking. Abini felt his gaze linger on her face a fraction longer than necessary. He did it often, always as if he were trying to read something written beneath her skin. It should have irritated her more than it did. Instead, it made her stand straighter. That annoyed her. Good, she thought. At least she still had irritation left. She set the folder down. Send him the message. Yiseok reached for the phone without a word. His thumbs moved once, quick and exact. Then he angled the screen toward her. Abini will come. She is bringing proof. Her eyes flicked up at him. You added my name. His face did not change. You are not invisible. The answer landed somewhere oddly tender and oddly dangerous at once. Abini looked away first and gathered the papers again. No, he will think I am desperate. Good. She gave him a flat look. That was not kindness. It was not meant to be. Abini almost smiled. Almost. The children had fallen asleep in the adjoining room. Warm, dry, finally quiet after too much fear. Every small shift from behind the door tugged at her chest in a way she refused to let show. She did not need softness right now. She needed focus. Yiseok noticed the glance she gave the door. They are safe, he said. Abini's eyes returned to him. For now. His expression remained unchanged. For now is enough. She studied him. He had the kind of calm that should have been infuriating in a room like this. Not detached, not cold, controlled, measured. A man who never seemed to spend words unless they were already doing work. It made him harder to trust. No, it also made him impossible to ignore. He was not begging to be believed. He was proving useful. And useful mattered. Abini let out one breath, then sat across from him. Tell me everything you know. He told her everything. And what Abini heard that night didn't just change her plan. It changed the war. Part 2 is coming. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because when she walks back into that building, no one is ready for what she brings with her.